While we were out shopping, I stopped to tie my shoelace. When I looked up again, my boyfriend, Robert, and my best friend Nia were already 10 feet ahead. I was about to step forward to catch up, but the space between them, the space that had always been mine, was slowly closing. They fell into step side by side. Picking up a conversation I had no way of joining, as if there had never been a third person there at all. Back in school, Robert and Nia were the ones everyone called gifted. After graduation, Robert and Nia became the youngest, attending physicians at the hospital. No matter how hard I pushed myself, I could only trail behind them, just another ordinary nurse. Robert would always ruffle my hair and say, "You're adorable, even when you're clueless." Then he'd turn around and seamlessly perform one complex surgery after another, with Nia watching their backs. I suddenly felt exhausted. This road I had been walking, always chasing after Robert, I didn't want to walk it anymore. We turned the corner and Robert and Nia disappeared from view entirely, not once from start to finish. Had either of them turned around to check if I was keeping up? I stood there quietly for a moment, then turned and walked away. Back at the hospital, a coworker raised an eyebrow and leaned over. "Didn't you switch shifts to go on a date? That was fast." "Yeah, it's done." I changed into my scrubs and sat back down at my station. The hospital kept us all busy. Over the course of a year, Robert and I had been on proper dates fewer than 10 times. Today, he had a rare day off, and I'd called in a favor with a coworker to swap shifts in advance. I thought that even just holding hands and walking around the neighborhood together would be enough. Then Nia showed up out of nowhere and threw everything off. Before we left, I'd made a point of telling them with a straight face not to talk about work, not one word. Both of them had pinched my cheeks and nodded eagerly. Okay, we get it." But halfway through dinner, someone brought it up, and before long, the two of them were going back and forth about patient cases. I sat there beside them, pushing rice around my plate. I don't even remember when the check was paid. Then the landline at the nurse's station rang, snapping me back. My coworker had already picked up a car accident up north. Several people were being rushed into the ER. I was about to text Robert when a message from him came through. First patient came in. Nia and I are heading back to the hospital. I turned the screen off and sat there blank. He still hadn't asked, not even once, where I had gone. After my last procedure of the day, I ran into Robert in the hallway. He looked worn out. I kept my eyes straight ahead and didn't fall into my usual habit of fussing over him. But the moment we crossed paths, he caught my wrist. He buried his face in the curve of my neck, a habit of his. "What's wrong? Don't recognize your own boyfriend?" Every time he came home after a long shift, he'd do this, said it was how he recharged my mind, told me to pull away. But there was a dull ache spreading through my chest that I couldn't explain. It had taken me 3 years to go from quietly loving Robert to actually standing by his side. The day we got together, someone in our cohort immediately started a side bet on how long we'd last. 'Cause honestly, the gap between us was hard to ignore. Robert had been at the top of his class every single year. Me since elementary school. I had teachers point fingers in my face and call me stupid. The one who'd stepped in front of me with open arms back then was Nia. I knew I wasn't the smart one. I always needed Robert's patience and Nia's encouragement, just to keep going, even though I had made up my mind. The moment he leaned in close, all that resentment I had been holding on to began quietly dissolving. We sat together in an empty stairwell. It was a rare moment alone in the silence. Robert finally spoke. "Maya? Yeah, can you try to act a little more mature from now on?" I blinked, got off guard. After a long pause, I slowly turned to look at him. "What?" His eyes were closed. His voice was flat. "The way you talk about the weather this afternoon. You disappeared without saying a word. You had Nia and me worried sick. We both finally had a day off. Even if you don't care about me, you could at least consider Nia. She's not your babysitter." I didn't move, but I felt like something inside me had cracked open, and cold air was rushing in. "Worried about me? Then why wasn't there a single call or text on my phone? Was it worry, or was I just ruining their day? Look at you. I say 2 things, and you're already crying." Robert's expression was full of resignation. The way he looked at me was the way you look at a child who refuses to grow up. I dropped my head. Tears hit the front of my shirt, leaving a damp patch. "Okay, it won't happen again," he sighed and patted the top of my head. "Go home and get some rest. Mia and I still need to go over a treatment plan." After Robert left, my phone rang. It was my dad. "Hey, sweetheart. Didn't you say you were bringing your boyfriend over for dinner?" "Still at work." I pressed my hand hard over my mouth so he wouldn't hear me break. "Honey, Maya." It took a while before I could speak normally. "Dad, he's not coming at dinner." My parents could tell something was wrong. They kept piling food onto my plate. When I set down my fork, I took a slow breath. I don't want to be a nurse anymore. They both stared at me. Didn't you say you'd repeat a whole year of high school just to get into nursing school? Are you having a rough time at work? Don't give up on your dream over a bad stretch. I shook my head without saying anything. Medicine was Robert's dream. It had never been mine. It started during a late study session in our senior year. He reached out his hand to me. Maya, work a little harder. Let's be together. Always. For that one sentence, I threw myself head first onto the road, chasing after him. What followed were years of dense medical terminology, precise and unforgiving procedures, and nights that never seemed to end. Things that came easily to everyone else took me 10 times the effort, sometimes 100. Once I started working, I had to stay alert every single hour, terrified of betraying a patient's trust. Even then, all Robert would do was cut my face and say, "Watch how, Nia. Does it stop being so scattered on the floor?" I was his girlfriend, but it had been a long time since he had looked at me like an equal. The next day, at lunch, I submitted my resignation and went to the cafeteria to eat. Nia carried her tray over and sat down across from me. She slid half of her tomato scramble into my bowl and studied my face. "You were crying last night, weren't you?" I looked up, not sure what she meant. Nia looked mildly surprised. "Nia and I worked so late, we just got a room at the hotel for the night," she said. "Robert just told me he forgot to let you know. He figured you'd be upset. I had slept at my own place last night and had no idea whether Robert had come home. And honestly, it didn't matter anymore." I kept eating. "Is that so?" Nia tilted her head, studying me with wide eyes. "Wait, you're really not upset? Then someone owes me a yogurt." She spun around. Robert appeared from behind me, placed a yogurt in Mia's palm, then sat down next to me. He frowned slightly. "Amaya is finally growing up. Normally, this would have set you off for 3 days straight. Hey, Maya is not like that." And just like that, the two of them launched into a debate about who knew me better. I sat between them, and everything became noise. My hands were shaking around my utensils. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The two people closest to me in the world were placing bets on my emotions. I turned to Robert. Slowly, my voice came out steady. "I want to break up." The table went quiet. Robert stared at me. "You." Before he could finish, Nia leaned over carefully. "Maya, are you mad at me? Last night was really just work. I didn't ask him to stay." Robert's brow tightened. When he looked back at me, the surprise in his eyes had curdled into irritation. He took my words as a tantrum and spoke coolly. "It's fine, Nia. You don't need to explain yourself. She's always like this, dramatic. It exhausts everyone around her." Nia opened her mouth to say something, but Robert pulled her away. I was left alone at the table. I threw out most of my food and went to submit my resignation to the head nurse. She didn't try very hard to talk me out of it. She just said the process would take at least a month. Back at my station, a coworker hesitated before sliding up next to me. "Maya, did you and Dr. Robert break up?" He hadn't agreed to it, but as far as I was concerned, we were over. I nodded. She exhaled slowly. "That explains it. A patient got aggressive earlier and shoved Dr. Nia. Dr. Robert picked her up right away and rushed her to the himself. I was watching. She barely even fell, but he completely panicked. My brow pulled together. Did she hurt her hand? The resentment hadn't gone anywhere, but my legs were already moving toward the before I'd made the decision. Back in school, Mia used to throw an arm around my shoulder and announce to no one in particular, "I'm going to be the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the country. Mia, I've got your back." Once we're both at the hospital, if her hand was injured, how would she ever operate again? Ever? A bad possibility tangled together in my head as I walked. By the time I got there, Nia was lying on the exam table, eyes red. "Nia, are you okay?" I crossed the room quickly. She spotted me and managed a small smile. "I'm fine. Just twisted my ankle." I had barely breathed in relief when Robert's voice cut through, flat and cold, satisfied. "Nia." I had no idea what he meant. "If you hadn't thrown a fit, Mia wouldn't have come after you to smooth things over. She wouldn't have been in the way of that patient." His words pinned me to the floor. I couldn't think straight. Mia was already pushing at his arm. "Why are you blaming Maya? That's not fair." But Robert kept his eyes on me. "Why haven't you grown up after all these years? You always make everyone adjust around you. Who do you think you are?" Silence. Something hot was slipping out of the corners of my eyes again, as if he'd finally noticed how sharp his words had been. He softened slightly. "Just try to be calmer going forward, okay?" He reached out to wipe my tears. I turned my head and stepped back. "Dr. Robert, we've already broken up. Please don't speak to me like that." Robert let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Maya, enough." Even Nia looked at me with disapproval. "Stop being stubborn." Honestly, they were more alike than either of them knew. Neither of them could ever really see what I said, what I felt, or who I was. I pulled up a bitter smile and walked out. The days that followed, Robert gave me the silent treatment. Between that and my own efforts to avoid him, we somehow went half a month without exchanging a single word. But he was the hospital's golden boy, and gossip about him never stopped. Word was that he brought Nia a fresh-cut steak every single day, while she recovered. Word was that they co-authored a paper published in a major journal, and got recognized by the chief of staff. When co-workers asked me for updates, I just shook my head. I didn't know anything. One afternoon, Nia stopped me in the hallway. She caught my sleeve like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Maya, did you really stop talking to me just because you and Robert fought? Come on, you two are both impossible. Let me be the bridge here. Just meet him halfway, please." I looked at my best friend of so many years, and felt something cold and unfamiliar wash over me. We had known each other longer. I hadn't done anything wrong. So why did she always take his side?
"Doctor, Nia?
I have work to get back to. If there's nothing else, please excuse me." The color drained from Nia's face in an instant. "Nia, come here." Robert was standing a short distance away. The glance he gave me was the kind you'd give a stranger. That was fine. I pulled my sleeve free and walked away. Not long after, the three of us ended up in the same OR. A colleague had called in sick, and I was filling in. The patient's case was complicated. The hospital was taking it seriously. Robert was the lead surgeon. Nia was assisting. I took a slow breath, geared up, and triple-checked every sterile instrument before we started. Halfway through the procedure, I was still tightly wound, checking every move twice. Both of them were focused. Expression, serious. Hemostat. I passed the hemostat to Nia, then her hand slipped. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter. Before I could bend down, Robert's voice came through, clipped and cold. "Get her out. Jessica, step in." Coming out of the OR, I noticed cold sweat soaking through my scrubs. It had only been a small hiccup. The surgery went fine overall. After the shift, Nia left looking shaken and distant. Then Robert's shadow fell over me. His eyes were tired, his voice heavy with disappointment. "A mistake like that? What kind of nurse are you?" I looked up at him in disbelief. "You saw what happened. That wasn't my fault. So you're saying it was Nia's?" Robert's expression went cold immediately. "Maya, since when do you pass the blame?" I understood then. He had decided in that moment to make me take the fall for Nia's sake. My fingers drifted to my chest without thinking. No wound there, but it hurts so much. I thought it might kill me. I don't know what Robert said to the head nurse. The next day, I was reprimanded in front of everyone. And a patient's family member happened to overhear. It spread fast. "That nurse, Maya, can't even hold a scalpel steady. She has no business in an operating room. One of these days, she's going to get someone killed." To contain the fallout, the hospital suspended me for a week. The head nurse sighed. "Administration is pushing hard on this. I put a rush on your resignation paperwork. Let's get your things today." At 3 in the afternoon, I changed into my street clothes and packed everything into a cardboard box. Robert spotted me in the hallway and frowned. "They're letting you go over something this minor?"
"Suspended," I said.
He visibly relaxed and reached over to ruffle my hair. "Then take it as a vacation. Rest up. I'll take you somewhere fun next week." I said okay and walked out of the hospital. He didn't know I was never coming back. The weight of the cardboard box in my arms felt surprisingly light as I walked through the sliding glass doors of the hospital. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint, sharp scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. I didn't call a cab. I didn't look back at the towering concrete wings of the building where I had spent the last 3 years of my life shrinking myself to fit into the corners of someone else's world. Instead, I walked to the bus stop down the street, set the box on my lap, and watched the hospital fade into the gray skyline as the bus pulled away. When I reached my apartment, the one Robert had chosen because it was only a 10-minute walk from his favorite bistro, even though it made my commute twice as long, the silence hit me first. Usually, the apartment felt like a waiting room. I was always waiting for the sound of his key in the lock, waiting to see what kind of mood his grueling shifts had left him in, waiting to hear if Nia would be joining us for dinner because she had a difficult consult and needed to decompress. I set the box on the kitchen counter. Inside were a few spare scrubs, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, a pair of worn-out nursing shears, and a small, framed photo of the three of us on graduation day. In the photo, Robert and Nia were standing slightly forward, holding their diplomas high, their faces glowing with the effortless confidence of people who knew the world belonged to them. I was standing half a step behind them, my smile tight and anxious, holding a bouquet of flowers that Nia's mother had handed me because she had too many to carry. I picked up the frame, slid the backing off, and took the photo out. I didn't tear it. I just laid it flat on the counter, face down. Then, I took out my phone. My fingers didn't shake as I opened Robert's contact card. I tapped the red button at the bottom of the screen. delete contact. I did the same with Nia's. Then I went into my settings and blocked both of their numbers. It wasn't an act of anger. Anger required energy, and I had none left. It was simply a matter of survival. I was tired of being the background noise in their symphony. I spent the rest of the evening packing. I didn't own much that Robert had given me. Most of his gifts had been practical things he thought I needed to improve myself. Books on advanced clinical nursing, a high-end stethoscope that felt too heavy around my neck, a planner to help me manage my time better. I left all of those on the dining table, neatly arranged. I only packed my clothes, my books, and the few things I had bought with my own hard-earned salary. By midnight, 3 suitcases stood by the door. I called my parents. Maya, my mother's voice was soft, laced with the immediate worry that only a mother can convey. Is everything okay? It's late. I'm fine, Mom, I said, and for the first time in months, the words didn't feel like a lie. My suspension started today. I've decided to move back home for a little while, if that's okay. There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of her shifting in bed, and then my father's low voice in the background. Of course it's okay, sweetheart, my mother said. Your room is exactly how you left it. Do you need your father to come pick you up? No, I said, swallowing the small lump in my throat. I'll take a taxi in the morning. I just wanted to let you know. We'll have breakfast waiting, she promised. That night, I slept on the sofa instead of the bed I had shared with Robert. It was narrow and slightly uncomfortable, but it was mine. No one was turning away from me in their sleep. No one was dreaming of surgeries I could never understand. The first week at my parents' house was quiet. My mother didn't ask about Robert, and my father didn't ask about the hospital. They seemed to understand, with the quiet intuition of people who had watched me grow up, that I was healing from a wound I couldn't yet describe. Every morning, my father would make a pot of black coffee, and we would sit on the back porch watching the neighborhood wake up. He was a retired librarian, a man who measured his life in the steady turning of pages rather than the high-stakes adrenaline of an emergency room. You look rested, Maya, he said one Tuesday morning, peering at me over the rim of his glasses. I am, I said, holding the warm mug between my hands. I slept past 6 today. I don't think I've done that since I was 18. The body has a way of telling us when we've been running in the wrong direction, he said softly. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't the running, it's stopping. I looked down at my hands. The skin around my knuckles was no longer dry and cracked from the harsh hospital disinfectant. I always thought that if I just ran fast enough, I'd eventually catch up to them. I thought that if I worked hard enough, Robert would look at me the way he looks at. I trailed off, unable to bring myself to say Nia's name. Maya, my father said, setting his coffee down. A path that requires you to constantly chase someone else isn't a path at all. It's a shadow. You were never meant to live in a shadow. Later that afternoon, I sat in my old bedroom and opened my laptop. I had a month before my resignation was finalized, but the head nurse had assured me she would expedite the paperwork, so I wouldn't have to return to the ward. My bank account had enough savings to last me 6 months if I was careful. I began to search for jobs, but this time, I checked the box that filtered out major hospitals and trauma centers. I didn't want the sterile, white corridors. I didn't want the overhead pages, the sharp, metallic smell of the operating rooms, or the rigid hierarchy that made me feel like an insect under a microscope. I found a listing for a small, private pediatric rehabilitation clinic called the Elm Tree Center, located in a quiet suburb about 30 minutes from my parents' house. The job description was simple, looking for a compassionate pediatric nurse to assist with long-term therapy plans for children recovering from developmental delays and motor injuries. Patience and empathy preferred over high-volume clinical experience. Patience and empathy. In the surgical ward, those qualities were often treated as weaknesses, luxuries we didn't have time for when the beds needed to be cleared for the next admission. But here, they were listed as requirements. I spent 2 hours drafting my cover letter. For the first time, I didn't try to inflate my achievements or pretend I was destined for the cutting edge of medicine. I wrote honestly about why I wanted the job, because I believed that recovery wasn't just about fixing a body, but about helping a person feel whole again. I hit submit and closed the laptop. On Friday, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice on the other end was instantly familiar.
Maya?
It was Nia. She was using her professional voice, the one she used when she was speaking to a patient's family, soft but slightly detached. Hello, Nia, I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion that usually flooded me whenever she called. Oh, thank goodness, she breathed, though there was a hint of irritation beneath her relief. Why have you been ignoring Robert's calls? He's been beside himself. He went to your apartment on Wednesday to take you out for that dinner he promised, and the landlord said you'd moved out. Maya, what is going on with you? I moved back to my parents' house, I said simply, without telling him. He's your boyfriend, Maya. You can't just vanish because you're having a hard time with the suspension. We both know the hospital was unfair to put that on you, but Robert is doing everything he can to talk to the chief. He's trying to fix this for you. He doesn't need to fix anything, I said. And we broke up, Nia. I told him that in the cafeteria. I told him that in the ER. Nia let out a short, exasperated sigh. Maya, you cannot be serious. We all know you were just upset because of the stress. You always get like this when things get too overwhelming. You shut down and make these dramatic statements, but you don't actually mean them. You and Robert have been together for 3 years. You don't just throw that away over a misunderstanding. I looked out the window at my mother's rose bushes. They were starting to lose their petals, preparing for the cold winter ahead. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Nia. It was a realization. A realization of what? Her voice sharpened, the defensive edge she always used when she felt her intellect or intentions were being questioned. That you're mad because Robert and I work together? Because we have to share a hotel room occasionally when the shifts are 24 hours long? I told you, nothing happened. We were working on the manuscript. If you just went to medical school instead of nursing, you'd understand how demanding this life is. There it was, the quiet, polite condescension that had been sprinkled throughout our entire friendship. The assumption that my boundaries were just a symptom of my lack of education, my inability to comprehend the demanding life of the gifted. I understand perfectly, I said softly, which is why I'm no longer a part of it. What does that mean? I resigned, Nia. My paperwork is being processed. I am not coming back to the hospital, and I am not coming back to Robert. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For the first time in our lives, Nia didn't have a quick, clever response. You resigned, she whispered. But you worked so hard to get into that ward. You repeated your exams. I worked hard because I thought it would make Robert look at me, I said, the truth feeling incredibly light as it left my lips. And I stayed because I thought you were my friend. But I don't want to live my life trying to prove my worth to people who will only ever see me as a shadow. I hope you and Robert have a wonderful career. Goodbye, Nia. I hung up before she could reply. I didn't block her number again. I had already done that to her personal line. She must have used a hospital phone to call me, but I felt a strange, quiet sense of closure. The girl who would have spent 3 days crying over Nia's disapproval was gone. 2 days later, I was called in for an interview at the Elm Tree Center. The clinic was located in a converted Victorian house, surrounded by massive, ancient elm trees. The waiting room didn't have the cold, sterile smell of bleach. Instead, it smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. There were no harsh fluorescent lights, just soft lamps and colorful drawings pinned to the corkboards on the walls. The clinic director, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, met me in the lobby. She didn't look at me with the sharp, assessing gaze of the head nurse at the hospital. She smiled warmly and offered me a cup of chamomile tea. Your resume is impressive, Maya, she said as we sat in her sunlit office. You have 3 years of experience in a high-volume surgical ward. That's demanding work. Why the sudden shift to pediatric rehab? I looked down at my tea, then up at her. I had practiced a polished, professional response in the mirror, but looking at Evelyn's kind face, I decided to speak the truth. I realized I was in the wrong place, I said quietly. In the surgical ward, everything is fast. You don't have time to know the patients. You check their vitals, you pass the instruments, you prep the next bed. I felt like a machine. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people through their recovery, not just their surgeries. I wanted to be there for the slow, quiet parts where they actually have to put their lives back together. Evelyn watched me for a long moment, a soft smile spreading across her face. Most of the applicants we get from the major hospitals are looking for a break, she said. They want less stress, fewer hours. But you're looking for connection. Yes, I said. That's exactly what our children need, she said, closing my folder. Many of them have been through traumatic accidents or have chronic illnesses. They don't need a nurse who is rushing them through their exercises. They need someone who can sit with them on the floor, who can celebrate the tiny victories, like moving a toe or holding a pencil, that the rest of the world takes for granted. Can you do that, Maya? I would love to, I said. She stood up and extended her hand. We have a trial period of 3 weeks, starting next Monday. Welcome to the team, Maya. As I walked out of the clinic, the sun broke through the autumn clouds, warming my shoulders. For the first time in 3 years, my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't feel the phantom weight of an upcoming shift or the anxiety of a text from Robert that I had to answer immediately. I was just Maya, and that was enough. The first 2 weeks at Elm Tree were a revelation. My days were spent with children like Toby, a 6-year-old boy who had lost coordination in his right leg after a car accident. He was shy, his eyes wide and fearful whenever he was asked to try his walking exercises. At first, he refused to leave his mother's side. The physical therapist, a cheerful man named Marcus, was patient, but Toby was too terrified of falling to try. I didn't rush him. On my 3rd day, I brought a box of colored markers and a large roll of butcher paper. I sat on the floor, a few feet away from Toby, and began to draw a simple, clumsy picture of a dragon. Toby watched me from behind his mother's coat. "I'm not very good at drawing," I said to no one in particular, tracing a crooked wing. Robert always said my hands were too shaky for the fine details. "It's not shaky," a small voice whispered. I looked up and smiled. "Really? Thanks, Toby. Do you want to help me color the scales? I can't reach the other side of the paper." Toby hesitated, then slowly slid off his mother's lap. He crawled over, picked up a green marker, and began to color. Over the next hour, we didn't talk about his leg. We talked about dragons and space rockets. By the end of the week, Toby was standing up to reach the top of the paper, using his weak leg to support his weight, without even realizing he was doing it. When Marcus pointed it out to his mother, she burst into tears. I felt a warm, quiet glow in my chest that no successful surgery in the OR had ever given me. I wasn't the clueless one here. My patience, the very thing Robert had dismissed as a waste of time, was the key to helping this little boy heal. But my peace was not destined to go entirely undisturbed. At the end of my second week, as I was leaving the clinic around 5 in the afternoon, I saw a familiar sleek, black sedan parked near the entrance. My heart did a single, familiar flutter of anxiety, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. Robert was leaning against the hood of his car, his hands shoved into the pockets of his expensive wool coat. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced than usual, and his hair, which he usually kept perfectly styled, was slightly messy. When he saw me, his expression shifted from irritation to a strange, desperate kind of relief. He took a step forward. "Maya," he said. I stopped a few feet away from him, holding my tote bag tightly. "Robert, how did you find me?" "Nia told me you mentioned leaving the hospital," he said, his voice carrying that familiar, slightly patronizing tone of authority. "I had to call 3 different clinics before I found one that had a new hire named Maya. Why are you doing this? Why are you working in a place like this?" He gestured vaguely at the Victorian house behind me. "It's a daycare, Maya. You're a trained surgical nurse." "It's a rehabilitation clinic," I corrected him, my voice remarkably calm. "And I like it here." Robert stepped closer, reaching out as if to catch my wrist, but I stepped back, out of his reach. His hand hovered in the air for a second before he let it drop, his brow furrowing. "Are you still angry about the suspension?" he asked, his voice softening into the soothing tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "I told you I talked to the chief of surgery. I explained that it was a chaotic environment, that there was a misunderstanding with the instruments. The suspension has been lifted, Maya. You can come back on Monday. I even arranged for you to be transferred to a different surgical team, so you don't have to work under the head nurse who reprimanded you."
"See?
I fixed it." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the handsome face that I had spent 3 years adoring, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he knew what was best for me. And for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no regret. Just a profound, empty space where my devotion used to be. "You didn't fix anything, Robert," I said. "You fixed it for yourself, so you wouldn't have to feel guilty." "Guilty? For what?" He looked genuinely bewildered. "Maya, I was trying to protect Nia. You saw how shaken she was after that patient shoved her. Her hands are her career. If she got a reputation for dropping instruments in the OR, it would have ruined her. You're a nurse, Maya. You can work anywhere. But Nia made a mistake," I said, cutting him off. "She dropped the hemostat because she was distracted. And instead of letting her take responsibility for her own actions, you used your position to shift the blame to me. You let the entire department think I was incompetent. You let a patient's family hear that I was a danger in the operating room. It was one minor incident." Robert raised his voice slightly, his patience wearing thin. "No one died. The surgery was a success. Why do you always have to make everything about yourself?" Nia was devastated. She has been crying for days because you won't answer her texts. She thinks she lost her best friend because of a stupid misunderstanding. "She didn't lose her best friend because of a misunderstanding," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "She lost her because she sat by and watched you destroy my reputation to protect hers, and she didn't say a single word to stop you. She was willing to let me be the sacrifice so she could keep her perfect record." Robert stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He wasn't used to me speaking like this. He was used to the Maya who would drop her head, let her tears fall, and whisper, "Okay, I'll try to do better." "Maya," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you're being incredibly cold. This isn't you." "No," I said. "This is finally me. The girl you knew was someone I invented because I thought it was the only way you would love me. But I'm done playing that part." "So what? You're just going to throw away 3 years of our lives? Just like that?" There was a sudden, sharp edge of panic in his eyes now. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that he was losing his grip on me. We were supposed to buy a house next year, Maya. We were supposed to build a life. You were building a life, I said. I was just the person who kept the apartment clean and waited for you to have a spare hour to notice me. I don't want that life anymore, Robert. I turned to walk away, but he caught my arm. His grip wasn't tight, but it was firm. Maya, wait. Please, he said, and for the first time since I had known him, there was a tremor of vulnerability in his voice. I love you. You know that, don't you? I'm busy. My mind is always on the patients, on the research. I know I haven't been the perfect boyfriend, but I can change. We can work this out. Just come home tonight. Let's talk. I looked down at his hand on my sleeve. I remembered how much I used to crave his touch, how a single pat on the head could make up for days of neglect. I gently, but firmly pulled my arm out of his grasp. I am home, Robert, I said, looking back at the quiet clinic with its warm yellow lights. Please don't come here again. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing under the fading light of the autumn sky, looking incredibly small, his shadow stretching out long and empty on the pavement behind him. The weeks rolled into months, and winter arrived with a quiet blanket of white snow that covered the city. My life at Elm Tree fell into a peaceful, steady rhythm. I was no longer running on caffeine and anxiety. I woke up early because I wanted to, not because an alarm demanded it. I spent my weekends cooking with my mother, helping my father catalog his books, and reading novels that had nothing to do with cardiology or surgical procedures. I also began to study again. But this time, I wasn't memorizing complex surgical terms to impress Robert. I was studying pediatric occupational therapy. Evelyn had noticed my talent for connecting with the children and had offered to sponsor my certification if I wanted to transition into a therapist role. You have a gift, Maya, she told me one afternoon over lunch. You see the things other people miss. That's not something you can learn from a textbook. For the first time in my life, someone called me gifted for who I actually was, not for what I could perform under pressure. One afternoon in late January, Marcus, the physical therapist, came into the break room with a tablet in his hand. He looked at me with a hesitant expression. Hey, Maya, he said. Didn't you used to work at the General Hospital? Yes, I said, setting my teacup down. Why? There's an article in the local medical gazette, he said, sliding the tablet over to me. I thought you might want to see it. I looked at the screen. The headline read, Internal Inquiry at General Hospital Reveals Report Falsification in Cardiothoracic Department. 2 senior residents sanctioned. My chest tightened slightly, but I forced myself to read the article. According to the report, a routine administrative audit of operating room videos had been conducted after a patient's family raised questions about a post-operative complication. While the complication itself was determined to be unavoidable, the auditors discovered a discrepancy between the written surgical log and the actual video recording of a procedure that had taken place 3 months prior. The video showed that during a complex valve replacement, the assisting resident, Dr. Nia, had dropped a vital sterile instrument, causing a temporary delay in the procedure. However, the lead resident, Dr. Robert, had signed off on an official report that attributed the delay to nursing prep error, which had led to the suspension of a surgical nurse. The inquiry concluded that Dr. Robert had intentionally falsified the report to shield Dr. Nia from disciplinary action, and that Dr. Nia had been complicit by failing to correct the record. As a result, both had been stripped of their golden boy and girl status. Robert's pending promotion to attending physician had been indefinitely deferred, and he was placed on a strict probationary period. Nia was transferred out of the prestigious cardiothoracic division to a general outpatient clinic, her dream of becoming the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the country severely derailed. I stared at the screen for a long time. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a sense of vindictive satisfaction. But as I sat there in the quiet break room, all I felt was a profound sense of sadness. Not for them, but for the years I had wasted believing that their brilliant intellects made them better people than me. They were so brilliant, yet they had ruined their own futures over a lie born of arrogance. Are you okay, Maya? Marcus asked gently. I am, I said, sliding the tablet back to him. I'm just glad the truth came out. They sounds like a piece of work, Marcus muttered, shaking his head. To let someone else take the fall like that, that's not what medicine is about. No, I agreed softly. It isn't. The final chapter of my past arrived on a rainy evening in early spring. I was at the local library helping my father pack up some books for a community donation drive. The library was quiet, the only sound being the steady patter of rain against the high windows and the soft rustle of paper. My father had gone to the back room to fetch another box, leaving me at the main desk. The bell above the entrance chimed, and I looked up, expecting a late-night patron looking to return a book before closing. Instead, Nia stood there. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair damp from the rain. She looked different. The sharp, polished edge she always carried was gone, replaced by a quiet, subdued exhaustion. She looked like she had been sleeping as little as I used to. She saw me, and her footsteps hesitated before she slowly walked toward the desk. Maya, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Nia, I said. I didn't smile, but I didn't scowl either. I just waited. She stopped on the other side of the counter, her hands clutching her purse. I went to your parents' house. Your mother told me you might be here. What do you need, Nia? She looked down at the wooden surface of the desk, her fingers tracing a scratch in the varnish. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I know it's late. I know it doesn't change anything. But the inquiry, everything came out. I saw the article, I said. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, looking embarrassed.
We were so stupid, Maya.
Especially me. Robert. Robert was always so focused on our careers, on keeping our positions. He told me that if I took the blame for the instrument, the board would look at me differently. He said you wouldn't mind, that you were just a nurse, and you could easily find another shift.
And I
let myself believe him, because I was terrified of failing. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for something I wasn't sure I could give her. I thought we were a team, the three of us, but I realize now that I was just as selfish as he was. I let him push you away, because it was easier for me to keep standing next to him. I lost my best friend, Maya. The only person who actually cared about me for me, not for my surgical skills. I listened to her, and the final, lingering knots of resentment in my chest quietly unraveled. I looked at this girl who had been my protector in elementary school, the one who had stood in front of me when teachers called me stupid. We had been so young then, and our friendship had been real. But somewhere along the way, the pressure of the world, the obsession with success, and the shadow of Robert's ambition had corrupted it. I forgive you, Nia, I said softly. She gasped slightly, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. Really? Yes, I said. But forgiving you doesn't mean we can go back to how things were. The friendship we had, we outgrew it a long time ago. I'm not the person who needs to be protected anymore, and you're not the person who needs a buffer between you and the rest of the world. Nia lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as she wept quietly. I know, she whispered. I needed to hear you say it.
I'm so sorry, Maya.
For everything. I hope you find your way, Nia, I said. I really do. She stayed for a few more minutes, her quiet sobs slowly tapering off into a heavy, resigned silence. When she finally turned to leave, she looked lighter, as if she had deposited a heavy burden at my feet. I watched her walk out into the rain, and this time, I didn't feel the urge to run after her. My father returned from the back room, carrying a heavy box of books. He set it on the counter, looked at the door, and then looked at me. He didn't ask who had been there, but he reached over and gently patted my hand. Ready to go home, sweetheart? He asked. Yes, Dad, I said, smiling. I am. The spring turned into summer, and the world outside the Elm Tree Center was lush, green, and vibrant. Toby had graduated from his therapy program. On his last day, he ran across the lawn without his brace, laughing as he threw his arms around my waist to give me a sticky, chocolate-flavored hug. He handed me a drawing of a dragon, this one perfectly colored within the lines. I did the fine details, Maya, he whispered proudly.
Just like you taught me.
You did a beautiful job, Toby, I said, blinking back tears of absolute joy. You're a master artist. As his mother led him to their car, waving back at us, Marcus came to stand beside me, his shoulder lightly brushing mine. You're going to make a fantastic therapist, Maya, he said, looking at me with a warm, genuine smile that I had come to look forward to every day. The university clinical director called this morning. Your application for the certification program was approved. You start classes in the fall. I looked down at the drawing in my hand, then out at the quiet, sun-drenched street. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I can't wait. Later that evening, after the clinic had closed, I walked out to the parking lot. The air was warm, smelling of cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. As I walked down the stone path, I noticed that my sneaker lace had come undone. I stopped, knelt down on the gravel, and took my time tying it. I didn't rush. I didn't worry about who was ahead of me, or who was waiting, or how many steps I had to take to keep up. When I stood up, I looked at the road ahead. It was wide, quiet, and completely empty. There was no one to chase, no shadow to live in. I took a deep, steady breath of the sweet summer air, adjusted the strap of my bag, and stepped forward into my own life, walking entirely at my own pace.